Welcome and good evening. It's Friday, May the 24th, and it's This Is Going Well, I Think, with David Cooper. I am David Cooper. It's This Is Going Well, I Think, the show where no one's listening. No one cares, the show where every episode's the last episode. Here in the U.S., it's Memorial Day weekend. My girlfriend has the weekend off, so I'm going to make this intro quick, lest she get mad at me for spending more time on the show. But first, this. It's Science Nerd Fridays here on the show, and Dan Riskin is going to be here to tell you all about creepy, crawly, sticky, disgusting cyborg cockroaches. Dan also wants to talk about the research on what cheating at Wordle says about you. Then it's conspiracy theory expert Dr. Lee Kuhnle, who's writing a book, and he wants to hash out a theory on this show to see if it's adequate for publishing. And I love that. Using this show is basically a writer's open mic. And the theory is this: the strange and weird cycle of conspiratorial thinking influencing fiction, especially science fiction, which then goes back and influences conspiratorial thinking. It's a trippy cycle, and Lee's going to walk us all through it, and I'm sure he'll talk about aliens. And finally, the heroic tale of a man who chased down a postal carrier after that postal worker made no attempt to deliver his package, only left a slip. What a hero. And from that, we'll talk to a professor who teaches at an MBA program about the decline of Canada Post. From stupid, chasing down a mail worker, to kind of interesting. What's going on with Canada Post? That is our show, and we got Dan Riskin coming up to talk about cyborg cockroaches in just a second. Creepy, crawly, cockroachy cockroaches. We're here to discuss not just regular cockroaches, not just irregular cockroaches, not just okay, I'll stop. Cyborg cockroaches with Dan Riskin, science expert. Dan, welcome.
And cyborg cockroach enthusiast, because I loved this paper. And this is hands down the most exciting paper in the cyborg cockroach genre that I've seen in months. This is great stuff. I'm very excited about it, and I'm really happy to talk to you about it. It's from Japan and Singapore. They made an arena. They had some Madagascar hissing cockroaches. Those are quite large. If you've ever been to a insectarium or a zoo where they have cockroaches and you've looked at them, or they've let them crawl on your hands or whatever, the big ones, these are the Madagascar hissing cockroaches. They don't bite. They're just really big. And
they hiss?
Yeah, they hiss. They make a noise with their exoskeleton or something like that. I've never actually heard them hiss, but I've called them Madagascar hissing cockroaches many times. And I've been to Madagascar, but I don't remember seeing any cockroaches when I was there. Although I did catch a bat that is a specialist on eating cockroaches.
Oh, stop it with the bats, Dan. Always with the bats.
Well, always with the bats. But this time, so what they did is they took these cockroaches and they made them into cyborgs. And my favorite line in the paper is, how to prepare a cyborg insect is detailed in the supplementary materials. So I, of course, went to the supplementary materials and read up on how to make a cyborg cockroach. It doesn't sound like it's very pleasant for the cockroach, but I'm amazed that it works. So a cockroach has some sensors that you tap into. It's got at the front these things called antennae, right? You've seen antennae on insects?
Yeah. I thought it's antennae.
Okay, antennae. But what you do is you hook up an electrode to each of them, and then when you zap them, it makes them turn. And I don't know whether they turn away from the zap or toward the zap, but you get one hooked onto the right one and one hooked onto the left one, and you can literally, with a remote control, make the cockroach turn left or right.
Got it. I'm looking at these backpacks for the cockroaches. They're pretty cool. It's like a circuit board and a lithium-ion battery, and it's
well, you got a power source, yeah,
like an antenna.
But then that's not the only.
It's a looking.
So that's the left and right, but you also need one to make them go, because sometimes they stop, and then left and right doesn't do anything. So on the back of a cockroach are these two projections that almost look like butt antennae, but they're called cerci, C-E-R-C-I. Great word for Scrabble. Great word for crossword puzzles. Great thing to know. It's a pressure sensor. It's a very sensitive pressure sensor. And one of the things about cockroaches that I've learned is that if you try to step on a cockroach, there's a pressure wave of air that precedes your foot. And when it hits the cerci, they accelerate immediately. And it's a motor response. They don't have to think about it. It just makes their legs go really fast. And so there's this wiring connected to those things that when they get activated, they make the cockroach go. So there's wires from the backpack that go to those things that when you send a signal there, it makes them go. Now, I can't help but feel bad for the cockroach because can you imagine if you had this really sensitive thing that could sense the pressure wave of a foot coming down on you? Like, you can imagine those are like the most sensitive pieces of anatomy imaginable for this cockroach. And then they're sticking little pieces of wire into those and then like gluing them in place so that they can send an electrical circuit. I bet that isn't very nice for the cockroach. So I feel kind of bad for them.
Do you? That's also a weird evolutionary response. And is that why they're so hard to kill? When you try to kill them with your shoe, they speed up?
Yeah, that's the idea, is that if something's coming up on them, there's a pressure wave, like a predator or anything, then they run immediately.
Wow. Okay, so they got these backpacks on. They're in an arena. That arena probably needs an announcer if they don't already have one. That could be a job.
Totally. And a monster truck.
I would fly over. Is it Singapore, Japan? Where was this done? I don't know
I just know where the researchers were from. I don't know where the arena was.
Doesn't matter. Could be Outer Mongolia. I would fly there to take that job.
Yeah, to be the arena. And coming into the arena. Is that the idea? Is that...
I would model it more like the racetrack, the horse racetrack. And they're at the post, and they're off, and Six Legs takes the lead over Crawly Man. I don't know.
Crawly Man and Six Legs are great names for cockroaches. Keep going.
I don't
Who's the next one?
I don't have that like Robin Williams. I can go when I'm me. I can go off if I'm David Cooper. But if I'm playing a character or pretending to be something, it comes slow to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, the thing about Robin Williams is he would just go into some accent and then he would just be hilarious. But you can't do those accents now. And so now you watch a lot of the Robin Williams stuff. You're like, Robin Williams, you can't really. Yeah. That's not really cool. But you did make a lot of people laugh in your day, but we don't laugh at the same things anymore.
But he was kind of an equal opportunist. I mean, he was one of the early... big screen portrayals of a mainstream movie where it's a gay character and he's not gay himself. I mean, he was a pioneer for minorities that weren't that visible. But at the same time, he's sort of equal opportunity.
But you can't, I mean, that's the thing with no comedy can be held to the standard of a future generation. Like stuff that was funny at a time was funny at a time and, things have changed.
As you go back in the generations, it gets like so much worse.
Oh, it's just very quickly gets. I mean, to be honest, I have a science story that I don't think we're going to get into, so I'll just refer to it quickly. But it's about how gay marriage has not had any negative effects on heterosexual couples, and it hasn't discouraged heterosexual couples from getting married. There's some data that came out on that, and that's a good example of something where it's like if you polled people in the 80s, the majority of Americans were against gay marriage, and if you poll people today, the majority of Americans are for gay marriage, and it's not like 51-49. It was like 60% against it, and now it's like 70% for it. Like there's been a huge shift from the 1980s to today in terms of how people perceive that. And gay marriage is legal in Canada and the US and a lot of other places, not everywhere. But it's just like we've totally just changed how society perceives that stuff. And I think the world's getting better as a result of that stuff. So anyway, I'm not to throw Robin Williams under the bus. I love that guy. But it is interesting to look at the old stuff and see how it's changed.
But back to me being the announcer for the cockroach arena. I can't improv that quickly. But I would like to take a class to learn how to be like an American Southern auctioneer. They have to take a course and get certified.
Do they?
Like what? You're going
to get a cockroach. You want to buy a cockroach? Cockroach has a backpack. You want to buy that? It's a backpack. It's not going to be included.
There's a whole subculture of auctioneers in the U.S. South, and they are. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go on YouTube. They're amazing. They're amazing.
They are amazing.
That's a skill I want, and I don't have.
And those are. And it's like Have you ever watched like a debate, like a university debate? The way they debate. Like it's the most ludicrous way of talking. They're like, blah, 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 blah. But like they have these like, they just talk as fast as they can and fill all the time. And like, it's like a weird chant and they call it debate, but it's not like a reasoned conversation about something. It's just some kind of a performance thing. And people who do it, like it's a weird thing. There's a couple of those. Maybe there's some kind of a exploratory analysis to be done there, but it's neat.
Back to the cockroaches.
Okay, so the cockroaches are in the arena. What makes this interesting is that they're taking advantage of the fact that cockroaches don't need help. Cockroaches are good at stuff. Cockroaches are versatile, smart, very capable locomotors, and whereas if you build a robot and it gets stuck in the sand and you're like, oh, I don't know how to get this thing out of the thing, your cockroach is not going to get stuck in the sand. So what they do is they don't control the cockroach. They let the cockroach do whatever it wants, and it very very capably goes anywhere it wants to. But then every once in a while, they're like, you're too far over there. Turn left, go forward. Okay, now do your thing again. And what they've done is they've made a leader cockroach that they're sort of directing to one part of the arena. And then with the other cockroaches, they have these built-in algorithms. So they don't have to control all the other cockroaches. The other cockroaches just have this algorithm built in where there are cameras looking down at the arena and they can see where all the cockroaches are. And if the cockroach is too far away from the other cockroaches, then it is oriented, it's moved to go toward the leader. And if it can't figure out where the leader is, then it goes toward the other cockroaches. And that's it. And then once it's close enough, they leave it alone again. And they found that this was a very good way to get the group of cockroaches to go to where they want. And this is neat for a bunch of reasons. One is controlling a whole swarm could be computationally very tricky unless you have this kind of a system where you only really control one of them and the rest of them are using like an algorithm that just knows what to do and follows rules, and you don't have to do anything. And then the second thing is it can handle getting stuck. A cockroach ends up on its back. A cockroach gets its backpack stuck on a rock. They found a bunch of examples of cockroaches getting out of problems. They also had examples of cockroaches helping each other, but those were a little dicey. I think it's hard to tell whether the cockroaches were really helping each other or if they just were sort of in the same place at the same time and bumped into each other. But nonetheless, they were able to do this. And so the idea is that if you had a disaster with a whole bunch of rubble, and you wanted to send in sensors to look for people or whatever, cockroaches would do a great job. And this way you could have them go through there so that you're stuck under their rubble and then a cyborg cockroach comes and finds you and you're like, oh, great. The cyborg cockroaches are finally here.
I feel like the stereotype of that, the rubble and then someone gets saved and the rescuers, it's always like a golden retriever or a German shepherd, like a heroic dog. Now we're looking at greasy, slimy cockroaches.
Well, I don't know if greasy, slimy cockroaches. Maybe if they gave them cute names. Maybe if they were like, oh, it's Six Legs. Good old Six Legs is here. I love Six Legs.
Oh, man.
The good thing I know the name because the announcers. And he's stuck in the rubble, and here comes Six Legs. Six Legs is coming in to find him.
You're an auctioneer. You're not although, actually, now that I'm thinking of it, racetrack horse announcer and auctioneer are actually not that far apart.
Yeah, that is a tough differentiation to make. It's almost like comparing the sound of pouring water, which we did in a different episode, so that we don't need to get into that.
Yes, the answer is yes. But they didn't just create cyborg cockroaches. They erected, is that the right word? They elected, there's a word I'm looking for here. They created an army. Mm-hmm. Raised an army.
I think erected it might be the appropriate. Depends how they feel about the army, I guess.
They raised an army. All right, we'll be back with Dan Riskin in just a moment. Dan Riskin is here, science expert. Dan, do you subscribe to the New York Times word game, whatever? My girlfriend does.
I do. Do you?
No, because I'm a nerd and I know how to defeat...
and you have a hack.
Yeah, I defeat paywalls. I shouldn't do it.
You know what? I have a real problem, which is that I like to share the crossword with my wife, but I don't want to share the Wordle with my wife. And so we can't both do the Wordle because we have the same account, but we share the crossword. So so we have to take turns doing the Wordle. I can't do it every day, which maybe is good for my mental health. I don't know.
Regardless, people cheat at Wordle.
Yeah. People cheat at Wordle.
Why? You're only robbing yourself. It's like when I first took stand-up comedy, it would be very easy to lift little jokes from professional comedians when you're struggling to write. You don't know what you're doing, and so, stealing material, the thought crosses your mind. I suck, I'm a beginner, and here's these jokes I could use, and maybe I'd never get caught. Maybe I'll watch a comedy special from the 70s, from that not that well-known a comedian. And I remember reading a book about, getting into stand-up, and the author put out that you're not, even though it's cheating and unethical, and if you get called out for it, it's going to be a problem for you, you're also cheating yourself. You're robbing yourself of going through the process of becoming a better writer. You're robbing yourself of becoming a better Wordle player. You're not just taking it away from everyone else that you're saying, oh, I'm better than you. You're also robbing yourself of that joy of growing your craft.
I think you have really cut to the point of why cheating is dumb. You have it's the same thing with cheating on exams, the same thing with getting ChatGPT to write your essay for you. It's the process of creating something where the magic happens. It's not the thing itself. The paper doesn't matter. It's that the only way to write a paper is to think, and it's the thinking that matters. So yeah, I'm totally with you. And so, as doing a Wordle is on par with writing a book, I think, for a lot of people, because they're basically functionally equivalent in terms of how hard they are. Have you done Wordle yet today? I haven't done Wordle today.
I stopped doing Wordle. I was in with the bandwagon and I was out a long time ago.
You just bailed on the Wordle?
I don't know. It's like, I like it. I just didn't love it,
Look at that. My 7-day streak I've got going. Look at that. It's a blank Wordle. I'm just going to leave it like that right now. So it turns out that, why, like, cheating on Wordle, do you think it's ethical? Like, okay, obviously it's bad if you're trying to become a good person, but do you think that do you think it's ethically bad to cheat on Wordle?
And then tell people how great you are, or just keep it to yourself?
I'm not going to, that is a separate part. I just want to know, when you are doing Wordle and you're kind of stuck, and then you go to Google and you say, what's the Wordle answer today? And then you find the answer and then you type it in.
Is it bad or good? I think
if you're ethically unsound. If
you're bragging with your spouses, your friends, your loved ones about how great you are at Wordle and showing off your streak and how quickly you get it, that's ethically wrong. If you're just keeping it to yourself and you don't even tell anyone you play Wordle, I think it's ethically neutral. But I do still think you're robbing yourself of kind of expanding your mind and becoming better at seeing word patterns and all the little cognitive benefits you could get from Wordle. You're cheating yourself of that. But ethically, if you're not telling anyone your score, I think it's neutral.
Okay. Another question. Do you believe in God?
No.
Okay. So there's a link between those answers, according to this new paper, which is that it's hard to like get individual answers, but what they do is they look state by state at how often people search for what's the answer to today's Wordle. And different states have very different rates. Like in Maine, people search for that all the time. In California, they barely search for it at all. They did some statistics to try to control for, how many people live in a state and how much, how many people are doing Wordle and stuff like that using other stuff. And they came up with this Wordle cheat index. Now, their thinking is people aren't looking it up after they finish. Like, let's say they didn't they tried all 7 tries or whatever it is, and then they didn't get it. It tells you the answer at that point. So there'd be no reason to Google it at that point. So these clearly are people who are still playing the game, who have not yet solved it themselves.
Interesting.
And so they looked across states, and then they looked at the religiosity of those different states, like what percentage of people consider themselves religious, and they expected that religious people would be less likely to cheat. And that's what they found, is that religious people are less likely to cheat, or at least religious states where religion is more widespread are going to have lower rates of people Googling for what's the answer to today's Wordle.
Any idea about the mechanism there? I guess
the idea is that if you believe that there's a God, like an omnipresent God that's looking at you, then you believe that you are judged not necessarily for cheating when there are people who are affected or not. Cheating is cheating. And so there's this bigger picture sort of reason not to cheat, a bigger scale. Whereas if you are, say, an atheist, you might not have that concern because there's nobody watching, and so who cares?
I don't even really think it's cheating if you don't tell anyone. You know?
And they don't control for that, right? So there's no way to know whether people are then changing. I mean, one thing you can do very easily if you want to impress everybody with how smart you are at Wordle is when you create the little thing and it sends it out as a text message or a tweet or whatever, you can just copy one of the green squares and then paste it 7 times, and you can make it look like you can edit those.
Yeah, you can edit any image.
Yeah, but you don't even have to. They're individual images of squares. Like, it's so easy. Like, you just select one of them, copy it, and then delete everything, and then paste it 7 times and hit return, and everybody will think you got it on your first try.
Sure. At that point, I think it's ethically wrong. But I consider cheating at Wordle and not telling anyone the same as, I don't know, undoing a move in solitaire. Like, sometimes I play a lot of solitaire. I don't know why. It's such a weird thing. Yeah. I'm stuck in Windows 95 with the free games.
Oh, yeah. That was like written by like some intern or something like that. Like, there's a whole story about like whoever wrote that, which is one of the most used pieces of Microsoft software. They were like, it was like they weren't an important person. I think they were there for a summer or something like that, and they just threw that together. There's a story there. It might be as good as your LED story.
Well, we're going to get to that next week, I hope.
Next week.
We'll see.
I hope. We'll see.
But, solitaire. Sometimes, because solitaire is one of these interesting games, the thing that makes it so interesting is some games are unwinnable. There are unwinnable solitaire games, and there's games with a very kind of narrow decision path where that's the only way you can win. So if you make a blunder early on, but you don't know what the cards are yet, you will always lose that game. So even though you play with yourself, there's a bit of a risk involved because it could be an unwinnable game, or it could be a game where you make a mistake unbeknownst to you. You thought you made the best move, given all the information you had, and then the game's now unwinnable. Now, I sometimes get trapped near the end thinking, oh, this game's unwinnable because of this decision. Rather than just end the game and admit the loss.
You undo like 30 times to get back to that one fork in the road and go down the other
Maybe not 30.
fork?
If it's 30, I'll start a new game because who's got time for that? But if it's 5, yeah. And I don't consider that cheating because I don't show off my solitaire winning percentage to people. That's just for me having fun. So
What is your solitaire winning percentage?
I don't know. I'm getting good. Maybe 4 out of 5 games.
Oh, interesting. So you are bragging to people about your solitaire winning average, thus negating what you just said.
And it's getting pretty good as a result of me undoing moves.
Yeah, that's the trick. So there's a funny, this reminds me of a story about a year ago.
Probably way worse than I think I am.
But are you? Who? You're only cheating yourself.
Well, no, but at that juncture,
that's not cheating yourself.
I just made an unethical move. I just moved what I considered to be ethically neutral to something ethically wrong. I told you what my winning percentage was.
Yeah, you did.
I'm not 80%. I'm 80% with my undoing bullshit.
Yes, I tricked you. This is great. We're really getting somewhere. This is good.
And I was so quickly tempted into it without even realizing, after making a huge argument about how after making what I thought was an articulate, eloquent argument about how cheating is...
I tricked you. I ruined it.
So maybe cheating is wrong because you might be tempted to share the information without knowing.
Because you're sitting on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I like that I ruined your entire ethos with one question that you fell for and answered. That was exciting for me.
Did you do it on purpose or was that a happy accident?
No. That was on. I could see the opening and I went for it.
Good for you. Bravo.
Thanks.
Bravo.
Yeah. This is what friends do for each other. The thing I just really want to get out is, you know how Torontonians all think that they're just the greatest thing? Like, have you ever read Toronto Life magazine?
I have.
It is the worst.
Having lived in Toronto and now living in New York, I bet the one thing that really gets Torontonians goat is when New Yorkers think they're better than them.
Yeah, well, New York is, anyway, whatever. I'm not going to say which one's better, but Toronto does have this thing of like saying like, oh, Toronto's the greatest city in the world. We polled 100 Torontonians and they all agreed that Toronto's the best city.
I don't want to shit on Canadians specifically here from Toronto because I think any country, the biggest city in that country, those people will have that bias. I think. I don't know.
Interesting. I don't know if that's true.
But you were saying.
Those Copenhageners. But anyway, there was an article, I think it was in Toronto Life, or maybe it was in the Toronto Star and Toronto Life tweeted it about. But anyway, it was how Torontonians are better at Wordle than people in other parts of Canada. And I was like, it fit right into that Toronto Life thing. And I was like, oh, really? How do we know that? And so what they had done is they'd looked at Twitter feeds from across Canada, and they'd looked at how many moves it took for people to solve it in the different places in different parts of Canada. And lo and behold, Torontonians were all solving it in fewer moves than people in other parts of the world. And I was like, all that tells you is that Torontonians will only tweet out their Twitter score or their Wordle score when they did well, and they won't tweet it out when they have a bad Wordle game, as opposed to other Canadians who are more honest.
I would have come out with an article saying Torontonian Wordle players bigger narcissists than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, that's where it is. Yeah.
Dan, what a pleasure. Was there some conclusion that we didn't hit by blabbing on, or we got it all?
No, God, we hit all the conclusions. This was a great one.
All right. I look forward to hearing your Wordle score tomorrow.
It'll be first guess. I'll just tell you that right now.
I won 3 games of solitaire this morning.
Nice.
See what I did there because of the...
Yeah, no, I know. I hope you ended right there. That was a good edit out. That was a good one.
Coming up is conspiratorial thinking cycles influencing fiction and vice versa, and you're not going to want to miss this, is what some people say before they take a break. Should I have said it? I don't know. We are here with Professor of Political Science, Dr. Lee Kuhnle, PhD. Lee, welcome to the show.
Hey, David. Thanks for having me.
Normally, we talk conspiracy theories, and while we are going to do that, you're doing what I most like that my guests do. That didn't make grammatical sense, but I think you got the gist of it. You're using this show as an open mic to work out material. You're practicing things to figure them out so that when you do real media appearances with people that really matter, you'll have a good understanding of them. That's my favorite use of the show.
Well, it's why I love coming on your show. I've come before with discrete bits of here's a conspiracy we want to talk about. And you have done what no other person on, a media outlet has ever done, and taken it into really interesting philosophical directions. So, and I've really enjoyed those conversations and have learned a lot from them. So I thought instead of like just being like, here's a thing we did on our show, I thought I'd just come with an idea. And as you say, it is one that I'm actually struggling with. So I'm like halfway through a chapter that I'm writing. I'm not sure if it's got legs or not.
And worst comes to worst, it's just a lousy 10, 15 minutes discussed with me, and then it doesn't make it to the book, and then you become a New York Times #1 bestseller, and it's all because of me. You better thank me in the notes.
That's the plan. That's exactly the plan.
Before I started rolling here, you were talking kind of interesting about this feedback loop that may or may not exist in the conspiratorial world, where fiction, let's say, I don't know, birds aren't real is what I love. Not that this has happened with birds aren't real yet, but it could. And for those who don't know, birds aren't real is a movement to say that birds are a government conspiracy. I don't think it's much more hashed out than that birds don't exist. And so what could happen in your example or the thing that we're trying to talk about is, okay, there's a fiction that's put out. Some people start to believe it. And then in 20 years, people are now suspicious of birds all the time. And then it goes back into fiction. You know, maybe there's a movie about killer birds or birds that are cyborgs that are shooting people. And then the conspiratorial believers start thinking, well, birds shoot people. And it all happened because of this fiction. This is not a real example, but this is an example of the kind of thing you're talking about. I think. Did I get that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And while you're saying it's not a real example, I think it's going to become one. Like, I really do. And I almost hesitate to say this because, I mean, honestly, I have no skill as a fiction writer and I will never do this. But I really believe that if you want to make a quick, best-selling fictional book, you take whatever conspiratorial narratives are happening at the time and you just write them down as a fictional narrative, because conspiracy culture creates really good stories. And it's one of the things that I think is so attractive around also the conspiracies that are just simply not true, is that they're great stories. And what Nathan, my colleague, and I have noticed as we've been researching conspiracies over, oh man, it's been like a decade now, is this continual, as you call it, like a feedback loop between fictional narratives of conspiracies, say aliens, for example, and then the way that people who are true believers in these conspiracies understand that phenomenon. And it's almost like the fiction of 20 years ago is the reality of today. And while I've been thinking about this for a while, it really struck me last summer when we had that UAP testimony, David Grush especially, and I listened to the whole thing. And it just struck me as though this is an X-Files episode. Like, I am watching the X-Files, but this time it's not fiction. This time it's real. But the narrative it wasn't just tangentially related. It was like completely the X-Files. Like, there is a secret government organization and they've got the UFOs or UAPs as they call them today. And if you try and ask about them, you will be silenced and you will be threatened and maybe physically hurt or worse, disappeared, whatever. There is a cabal of people who know about it, but they're operating in secret. And so it goes far beyond just, there's, tangentially some connection between this story and that. David Grush had very little to do with E.T., for example, another extraterrestrial big blockbuster movie. But it was like the X-Files script, but in reality. What's interesting there, though, is the X-Files script doesn't come out of nowhere. The X-Files script, if you read one of I guess you would call him an influencer today, there's a guy, John Lear. He was the guy who inherited the Learjet fortune. And he's also a big UFO buff. He gets, in a way, scammed by what we know today as fraudulent documents. They're called the MJ-12 papers. And this was supposed to be a big kind of internal government leak in which this kind of stuff was exposed. John Lear and his two proteges, William Cooper and Bob Lazar, they totally buy this stuff. Although, side note, I kind of think Bob Lazar's a grifter, but the other two certainly Cooper and Lear, they buy this hook, line, and sinker, and they write about it in a nonfiction way. That also reads exactly like the X-Files, and it predates the X-Files by, roughly a couple of years, 5 years, 3 years, something like that. And it's as though, and I have no proof of this, I did try and research it, I can't find anything. But when you read William Cooper and then you watch the main narrative arc of the X-Files, you're like, oh, this is that. Like, this is that story, but now in a fiction. So it's like nonfiction becomes fiction, becomes nonfiction again. And in each iteration, you have a sort of new development of that conspiratorial myth.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I'm just picturing those hearings and like even the archetypes of all the characters at the hearings and the way they speak. It feels like an X-Files episode, like people are slipping into these roles, almost using that subconsciously as a script. And I see what you're saying. You get these folks producing this document based on their conspiratorial thinking, based on really the fake documents, those M12 documents, is
MJ12, Magic 12, yeah.
And so you get even then you get a fiction, the MJ12. It's they're not real documents or they're forgeries, not forgeries, hoaxes. Yeah. And then so you get fiction influencing conspiratorial thinking, which then influences fiction again. X-Files, which influences conspiratorial thinking, the hearings. Is it an ever-ending scale where at every step a little bit more gets added and it gets a little bit crazier, but it becomes believable because the fiction kind of normalized it? Like at each step, it gets seemingly worse. How do we break out of the cycle? How do you get folks who are bought in to break out? Or is that another conversation?
Well, I know you bring up a lot of really, crucial points here. I think that when you're not following this stuff really closely, I think the fact that it is so detailed and that you have so many different sources sort of talking in very similar ways about what the aliens look like or what the government's relationship to it is, or all of those kinds of things, it feels as though there's got to be some truth to it, right? Because you can't have all these different people saying essentially the same thing and there still not being anything there. I mean, let's say at least one could be forgiven for thinking about it that way, right? And yet when you see that this stuff develops literally over decades or more, I mean, the modern UFO myth, as it were, begins in the late 40s. And what's really interesting is when you go back to the early stuff, when you go back to the 40s and the 50s, it seems both hokey and bizarre because the later narrative fictionalized elements, which we see as central to the UFO story today, haven't yet been added in. And so it just seems wrong. Like, we know that if I say to you or to your audience, picture what you think an alien would look like, I think a lot of us are, without maybe necessarily knowing it, harking back to Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where you first get the kind of modern representation, sort of a little gray alien,
with the big head and the big eyes and the sort of like ovular head. Yeah, that's the classic.
Now it's not totally there yet, but it's much closer than in the 50s, where they are essentially humans wearing, silver ski suits or something like that, or maybe in the Star Trek of the 60s, where they could be anything from, pretty women in short skirts to weird kind of fuzzy teddy bear things, right? So those things seem quite distant to us because we don't have the kind of fictionalized versions of it, which then later almost act as templates for us to understand what we mean by this phenomena. Even something as straightforward as what shape is the flying object, who's trying to not put my fingers too much on the scales, what shape is the spacecraft that the aliens are flying in, that also develops sort of narratively through time, where certain films really represented in a specific way. And then we all, quote unquote, start to see it that way thereafter, even to the point where then when people are seeing what they assume to potentially be unidentified flying or aerial phenomena, that ambiguous data will be kind of interpreted because of the fictional narratives that we have stored in our maybe personal or cultural narrative memory. And I find this kind of interplay so interesting because, as you say, it is developmental. And so you don't just arrive at David Grush's narrative last summer out of nowhere, but you can see it develop for the last 70 years. And it isn't just one way. It isn't just fiction talking to conspiratorial culture, but it's also, smart authors mining that culture for a kind of, vein in the zeitgeist that's really getting people animated. And as I say, it always makes for really good stories.
I don't know why you danced around saying flying saucer. I guess you didn't want to bias the narrative for whatever reason. But let's take a quick break and come back with that. I'm here with Dr. Lee Kuhnle. I am here with Dr. Lee Kuhnle. We are discussing how conspiratorial thinking influences fiction, which then goes back to influencing conspiratorial thinking. It's a feedback loop, and the narratives get wackier and wackier. And it's sort of like manufacturing belief in a way. Like you get the fictional reports of, maybe I didn't state that correctly. Maybe you can hash out this thought a little better. But you get reports.
No, this is what you're supposed to do. That's why I'm coming to you with these half-formed ideas so that you sort out the rest of the chapter for me.
I don't know if it's like manufacturing belief, but let's say you were talking about in the 40s, all these initial reports of visitors and aircraft from other worlds. And then somehow a flying saucer becomes an image that gets put through fiction, maybe. And then that's what people start believing aliens look like, almost to the point where they think that they're seeing them, even when there's unexplained phenomena that's real and documented. I don't mean real as in it's aliens. I just mean it's unexplained and it's documented. People see flying saucers when they're not there. I don't know if manufacturing is the right word, but somehow through fiction influencing conspiratorial thinking and then that influencing fiction again, the conspiracy theorists start to see it as it was proposed in the fiction. If that makes sense.
It's exactly right. And with the example of the flying saucer, I'll give you an example of exactly how that came about. So the first use of this term flying saucer comes in a newspaper article that reports on one of the first sightings of extraterrestrials or reported UFOs by a civilian pilot named Kenneth Arnold. And he's flying around Mount Rainier, I think, in Washington. And he sees something. He sees a formation of flying objects that don't make sense to him. They're flying in patterns that don't make sense, and they are not of a shape that he has seen before. So he reports this, and he suggests that they flew like discs skipping across water. Like imagine if you like throw stones, say, and it kind of skips across water.
Yeah, like skipping when you're a kid. You learn how to skip a stone. Well, I didn't, but some kids do. I'm incompetent. But go on, yes.
Right. Now, that's a mouthful. And the journalist reporting it said they flew like flying saucers. Now, that's not at all what Kenneth Arnold saw. In fact, when he describes it, they look more like something between boomerangs and triangles. And not at all like flying saucers. But that was the kind of the journalist being savvy with, newspaper headlines, made a pithy headline out of that. And then that gets picked up by Robert Palmer, I think that's his name, of Amazing Stories, as well as then because this was in 47, you already in the early 50s, you have the first flying saucer films. And they are actually flying saucers. Now, I am no physicist. I mean, there's so many things I am not, but certainly like physics is so far beyond my ken that I shouldn't even venture down this line of what I'm about to say. But my understanding is like, if you're going to try and get something to fly, a saucer is like the worst kind of shape. You're going, unless you like throw it like a frisbee and everybody inside, gets nauseous and ill. That thing is very unstable.
that ride at the fair. I used to go to the
Yeah.
CNE in Toronto where they spin you
Gravitron.
around the Gravitron. I would
smells
throw
like
up every
vomit.
time. That was awful.
So it, as a intergalactic flying device, the saucer might be like one of the worst shapes you could choose. And it's also not what Kenneth Arnold saw, but it gets sort of represented that way, also very much in fiction. And then the first flying saucer movies become also very similar to the reports that happened shortly after them. So after the flying saucers are represented in films, when contactees, that's the contactees are the kind of precursors to the abductees in the 50s, when they talk about their encounters, they inevitably are dealing with beings that have exited a saucer-shaped craft.
Wow, it's crazy how a reporter trying to sensationalize a subheading or a headline, taking an object skipping across the water and then just writing that it's like a saucer flying, then influences what people believe they're seeing, or perhaps they're charlatans and lying. But I do think some people believe that their hallucinations were real. Some people have very sincerely held beliefs that they've had encounters with aliens, and I believe they think they're telling the truth. And yet in their accounts, they're subtly influenced by these fictions.
Yeah. And look, I think it goes far beyond just people who are having very extraordinary experiences. I think by and large, we interpret ambiguous phenomena through kind of maps that are provided for us from our culture that represents ambiguous stuff in specific ways, right? So, you might see it as an angel, or you might see it as a flying disc, or you might see it as this or that. The data itself might be quite sparse, and our brains and our minds are very good at filling in that ambiguous stuff. But the way it gets filled in is sort of provided to us to some extent from the fictional universe, in which I know I saw a film, I know it was fiction, but then later when I have an experience, it kind of gets interpreted for me in a way through certain, scaffolds, I guess, or structures. Now, there's another version.
Let me interject here because I want to draw a parallel. Isn't it curious that I don't want to even speak towards whether these experiences are real or not, or whether religion is real or not, but those that have experiences with God, or they feel they do, sincerely held beliefs that God spoke to them. Why is it always the religion that they were brought up in?
Right. Yeah.
Like you have Christians who say they spoke with God, and then you have people of other faiths saying they spoke with God, and it's always the God of their own religion.
That's a really good point.
And it's like what you already believe, or what you've already been conditioned to believe. If you have an experience that's transcendental, if you have an experience that is supernatural, that it feels like it's supernatural, it's always influenced by what you already believe. Generally speaking, I'm sure there are people I'm sure there's a Muslim who felt they had a Christian experience and converted. I'm sure there's a Christian who felt they had a Muslim experience and converted. But by and large.
Well, I was thinking the one exception that comes to mind is Saul to Paul, right? Where on the road to Damascus, God talks to the Jew Saul and says, "Why are you persecuted?" And then Saul becomes Paul. But I mean, it almost speaks to your point at how incredibly rare it is, and how you're right. Like, it's always going to be within your narrative religious tradition. I think that's really interesting. And maybe that will find its way.
Well, I just mean, if what you already have learned, whether it's from fiction or existing conspiracy, I can't speak today, whether it's through fiction or existing conspiracy theories, it influences an experience you have, or it influences what you believe. And the same can be said of religion. The same could be said of so many things. Yeah. Like whether you're brought up in a capitalist society or a communist society, like what you have learned to date colors your experiences so much. I mean, it's not a groundbreaking thought that I'm having. It just so happens in conspiratorial thinking too.
Exactly.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. And what I think is interesting here is that there is a flip side to this whole conversation, which emerges in certain conspiratorial cultures themselves, where they talk about, they have this concept called soft disclosure. And what it is a belief. One I think is erroneous, but just to put it out there, but there's a belief that actually fiction is being deliberately used by the real, quote unquote, the real power brokers in order to psychologically prepare a population for truths that we are at present unable to digest without, society falling apart. So people, including William Cooper, who was that earlier UFO conspiracy influencers of the late 80s and 90s, he talked about the prevalence of science fiction. I was like, this is no accident. Science fiction is being used to prepare the population, the sheeple out there, for the truth that can't be revealed yet. Because if we knew that aliens existed and that they had landed here, we would do all kinds of irrational things, like we would set money on fire and stop going to school, and who knows what.
Society would collapse. Yeah.
Society would collapse. But this then introduces a really bizarre inversion, which is that in certain conspiratorial subcultures, fiction is reality and reality is fiction, right? Your daily news, that's sheeple idiot stuff, that is not really to be believed because it's all distracting nonsense. But X-Files and other kinds of shows like that, which are on the face of it fiction, are actually sneakily providing a true insight into reality.
Well, Area 51 with Will Smith was a documentary, according to some at least.
Yeah. You see?
No, it's a fascinating point. And yeah, how that cycle then leads into certain individuals saying, no, these fictions are the government preparing us for the truth, from the power holders preparing us for the truth. Lee, thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for working this stuff out with me. It was an interesting conversation.
Thanks for having me. And I will definitely put you in the footnotes of this chapter should I manage to write it.
Oh, stop it. I'll put it on my resume. It'll be the only thing on my resume. Lee, I didn't say you were handsome this interview, but you are. Goodbye. Thank you. The time is nigh. We will talk to a heroic man, maybe the hero of the last 10,000 years, who, when a Canada Post worker was meant to deliver a parcel to him, only received a door slip. The worker never rang his doorbell. And what did this man do? He chased down the worker. A hero for the ages. That's in one moment. Today, a special guest. He joins us from Red Deer, Alberta, and he recently found himself in a bit of a pickle, but also kind of an impressive situation involving a Canada Post mail carrier. Imagine this. You're in a virtual meeting. You get a notification that your long-awaited package has arrived, except it's not long-awaited. You paid extra to have it delivered next day, so you go to your door, like anyone would. And then you find a delivery slip instead of your parcel. Despite being home the whole time in outrage, this man did not accept this. He was determined to get his package. He jumped in his car, he tracked down the mail carrier and confronted him. And that's where our story will begin with Josh Kralka. Josh, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Your story, a fun one, but I think it also sheds some light on some of the challenges, some of the inefficiencies we see with Canada Post. And it also is a story of heroic determination. Josh, walk us through what you were doing when you get this notification on your phone.
Yeah, like you said, I was in a work meeting and there was only a couple minutes left, fortunately, but I knew, like you said, I paid for this express post delivery. So I knew that it was tracked. It was supposed to be next day, and I knew it was out for delivery. And my office is below my front doors. So I could actually hear him walking up, and I got the notification saying that there was motion detected on the doorbell. And I knew it was a signed parcel, so I expected to have a knock at the door or doorbell to ring, but nothing happened. So I thought, oh, maybe this time he just left it on the steps. So I finished my meeting, and when I went upstairs, I was looking around on the doorbell footage. You can see me looking around, like, where's this parcel? And then, yeah, when I found the slip in the mailbox, I was kind of confused as to why the guy didn't knock. So then I checked the doorbell camera, and sure enough, you can see him walking right up the driveway, right to the house, and just throw stuff in the mailbox and headed out. So that just tells me that before he even came to my house, he had the slip pre-written that he's not going to deliver it today. So he decided he's not going to.
So he took the extra time to write up the slip, because those are handwritten slips, right?
Yeah, handwritten slip. He must have did it at the beginning of his shift.
Wild. He could have spent that 30 seconds waiting at your door. May I ask what the parcel was that was so urgent?
I chose not to disclose it in the article because
I know. Was it adult sex toys? What was it? Was it government documents? Are you a spy? I gotta know. It's okay if you don't disclose to me. It keeps the mystery alive.
Yeah, I like the mystery. I feel it takes away from the story, because if it were, say, like a box of Kleenex or something, you'd be like, why is this guy buying a box of Kleenex?
Look, you got a runny nose. I get runny noses. You need your Kleenex. You paid for your Kleenex. Look, even if it was something silly, like a figurine or a comic book, there are people that get important documents sent and they pay extra money to make sure that it's signed for and it arrives in one day. Maybe legal documents, maybe immigration documents, who knows what. What you ordered doesn't really matter, assuming you ordered it and it wasn't a friend, but I get what you're saying. It does take away from the crux of the story.
If I had said it was a $10,000 engagement ring for my fiance, well, then everyone's interested. And how could Canada Post take this and make you wait longer?
How could you waste $10,000 on a blood diamond? No, I'm kidding.
Exactly.
Lab grown only. Okay, so the guy leaves the slip. He takes the extra time to fill out the slip and not actually ring and knock. What goes through your mind when you see this all went down without you ever getting a knock or a ring?
I was a little frustrated at first. I was just thinking, like, well, I knew where he would be. I walk my dog every day at lunchtime. So every day at around 11:30, 12, I'm usually out walking. So I see him on the next street or the other, like, streets within my neighborhood. So I figured, I'll just catch him on the next corner. It was only 10 minutes ago, so he can only be 1 or 2 blocks away. So yeah, the article sounds a little crazy that I'm chasing the driver down, but I just drove one street over and there he was. So
look, CBC's got to sell articles. They got to make money somehow. Sensationalize headlines. Yeah. All right, so you track him down. It wasn't as difficult as maybe the article painted it out. And you walk up to confront him. What happens then?
Yeah, I honestly don't remember. I don't want to say the wrong thing, but yeah, I just went up to him. I was angry at the time. So that's probably why I kind of...
You wanted your $75,000 engagement ring.
Exactly. So I just went up to him with the slip and I just said, where's my parcel? And he's like, oh, well, I have it here. So he opens the door of his van and there was 5 boxes sitting there. So I was just like, oh, so 5 other neighbors in my neighborhood didn't get their parcel today because you're too lazy to deliver these 5 boxes. But I didn't say that. That's what I was thinking. But
in some sense, this guy wasn't lazy because he filled out these slips. You know what I mean? Like, he put in extra work to not have to do work.
That is true. Yeah, he put in work at the beginning of his shift. But yeah, so he gave me the parcel and I just grabbed it and left. I don't think I thanked him or anything, but just walked away.
How did the story get picked up? How do we go from a rather angry or at least annoyed interaction, mail delivery incompetence, I guess is how we would describe the situation, to this story being picked up? And I guess in some sense, us talking today.
Yeah, so after that, I think it was the following week, I was just chatting with my wife, just saying, I told her what happened, and she thought it was pretty ridiculous how you pay for a service and they don't deliver.
She wanted her $230,000 engagement ring.
Exactly.
Price keeps going up.
Yeah.
And it's weird because you're already married.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, after a couple of days, I just thought, well, just for shit, I'll write to CBC and just see what happens. If they don't post it, I don't care. I was angry at the time, so I just wrote a little bit of a blurb, and they thought it was a great story. And they're like, oh, we've heard of people in our own office that have had this problem. So they're like, let's run with it. Let's do it. So we went ahead, and yeah, it sure is blown up. In the last 2 days, I think I've gotten definitely a couple dozen people reach out to me over all kinds of social media. People have found me on Facebook or my work email address somewhere, or I've had people texting me. So it's been pretty crazy. A lot of people reaching out. Everything's been very positive and people thanking me for stepping up and saying something because it's happened to them or they've had a similar story. So it's been all very good.
So the article runs, Canada Post obviously embarrassed. Do you get a response from them?
Okay, yeah. So before I reached out to CBC, I thought it wouldn't be fair to not reach out to Canada Post first, see what they had to say. So I did create a service ticket with them and I was chatting with someone online. And their first response was saying that they're not allowed to leave parcels at your door without a signature. I said, okay, that's great. It's irrelevant to my story because they didn't give me a chance to answer the door. They kind of already had the slip filled out and ran. So they said they'd open a service ticket, and I have not heard back.
So the article runs. At any point, do you get an apology after the article runs?
I have not gotten anything. In the article, I guess Canada Post and the local union for them has replied to a CBC and said that they were sorry, but I haven't heard anything back direct.
CBC, they're sorry to the people that made them look bad, not to the average Joe or Josh, I guess. That is your name. Yeah. See what I did there? This is why I'm the most clever in the biz. They're not even reaching out to you. Who really does deserve the apology? Would you be satisfied with a written apology?
I don't think it would change my mind. But if they did, I mean, I guess it would be nice, but I'm not expecting anything.
What would you like to see changed?
Well, either I'd hope that they do their job and deliver parcels. If they want to change it and just make everyone pick things up, I mean, that'd be very unfortunate, but I think if they have the parcel, they should attempt to deliver it.
Will you be using UPS or FedEx for your next delivery?
I always try to. even before this. Yeah, I used to get upset with them all the time because I used to live on a street that had like an A street. So there was 51st Street and there was 51st A Street. So I mean, it's a little confusing, but if your day job is to deliver things to houses on those streets, like you should learn your area by, I mean, I imagine you would. But my neighbor on the next block and I became friends because we were constantly walking back and forth every other week, exchanging each other's mail.
Well, that's nice. In a way, they gave you a lifelong friend. Well, Josh, thanks for going over the incident with me. This was fun. I still consider you to be a great hero.
Thank you.
Josh Kralka, he joins us from Red Deer, Alberta. He recently chased down a Canada Post mail carrier to receive his $785,000 engagement ring. Josh, thanks again for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, another man who says he experienced something very similar with Canada Post, but this man is a professor who knows a thing or two about businesses and teaches at an MBA program. He's also got a lot to say about the decline of mail, so stay with us for that. Well, we just spoke to Josh Kralka, a heroic man who chased down a mail carrier. I'm with someone here who says he's experienced something similar, but he's also very qualified to talk on the subject. He wrote an 800-some-odd page PhD thesis on the origins, evolutions, and decline of the Canadian mail system. He's an associate professor at Carleton University in the Sprott School of Business. Ian Lee, welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me, David.
I'm excited to take what I thought was a bit of a silly story with Josh and take it in a serious direction. You are somewhat well qualified to comment on the Canadian postal system, aren't you?
Yeah, I fell into this because I was 9 years in banking, went back to school for my master's, and I got a summer job in the head office of Canada Post Corporation, corporate finance and banking. And then I went on for my PhD, and I realized nobody had ever done a PhD on the post office. And although I'm not a stamp collector, I had no real interest in it. I decided to do my thesis on it. And it was really fascinating because very quickly, I looked a lot at the U.S. postal system because it predated the Canadian postal system. And I realized if you go way, way back, and I'm talking before the American Revolution and George Washington, I found this incredible quote by George Washington: "We will bind the people to us with a chain that shall never be broken." And he was talking about the U.S. Postal Service.
Well, I live in the United States, and it's one of the few government services that functions on Saturday. And I cannot believe in all these years they have not cut funding for Saturday mail delivery. So there's something special, but I'm not sure what it is.
You're right. Well, I'm not going to dwell on the history, but once upon a time, we can't even imagine it now. Once upon a time, the postal system was the internet, the telegraph, the telephone, the radio. It was the totality of all communications. There was nothing other than the post office. That was the only way you could communicate in the 1600s and the 17 and the 1800s. It's only in our modern era with instantaneous communication that the post office is becoming increasingly less relevant.
Yeah, it seems like now for me, the post office is what I use to get 40 squishy toys ordered at cheap on Amazon.
Exactly.
I have a cat.
Exactly.
So what happened to you recently that was similar to Josh? Did you have to chase down a carrier? Did you have a slip left for you where they didn't actually try to deliver it?
And this is truly, I was renewing my passport.
Oh.
And so because I was going to Las Vegas to hear U2 at the Sphere. And I realized I got to get my passport renewed because it was expiring in 90 days or something. So I did it, and they said, don't worry, it'll be there in 10 days, and you don't even have to pay extra, just send it through the post. I said, okay. And so I was home working, grading papers, no ring at the doorbell, nothing. I went out to the door, and there's this sticker on the door saying, we've been here. You were not home. So sorry. You have to go and pick it up at a franchise outlet, but you have to wait for a full day. And I didn't get it until the following day. And it was indeed my passport sent to me within that 10-day period. But they made no attempt to ring on my door or knock on my door.
Slightly important document that they're just not even trying to deliver. You were quoted as saying that these tiny problems are really just a smaller thing or a microcosm of bigger problems going on. What's going on at Canada Post? They seem to be bleeding money.
They're hemorrhaging. And the way I like to put it, and you as a young person, David, you will know this, understand this deeply, any young person. Our young people today are the most digitized people in the world. That is in their DNA. I mean, your generation is just so digital. And when I mention the post office to my students, who are 22 years old on average, they just laugh. Oh, that's my grandmother's or my great-grandmother, that uses that. Because there's communication, electronic communication is instantaneous. A postal truck cannot travel at the speed of light, which is the speed of electronic communications. And so letter mail, which is the core business, is collapsing like a stone. And so they've got to reinvent themselves as a parcel post partner of e-commerce, which of course is exploding. And there is the problem. That's where the problem is with the post office today. The U.S. postal system is facing the very same collapse of letter mail, although it has stronger support, bigger country, much bigger population. Their decline has not been as precipitous as it has been in Canada. But Canada Post is literally, I think within 5 years, if they don't reinvent themselves, they will disappear.
Going to be in a world of trouble. I mean, then how will people send out basic mail like bills and government communications? What will happen then?
Well, what's happening is I've got the stats. I used I did an updated study in 2015 called "Is the check still in the mail?" That famous phrase. And anybody familiar with credit and collections? I'm a former banker. You phone up a delinquent customer and they say, "Oh, don't worry, sir. The check's in the mail."
Check's in the mail.
Check's in the mail. And what I concluded, showing the data from the audited annual report, is letter mail has collapsed. Invoices have collapsed because, of course, they've gone digital. Payments have gone digital. Transfer of money has gone digital. And so Canada Post has lost about 2/3 of the totality of the pieces of mail compared to 2006. So it is literally the foundation. It's Blockbuster. This is Blockbuster Video all over again. You wake up one day and you say, who's going to go and get a video? I can stream the thing on my television set. I'm not going to drive down 2-3 blocks or 10 blocks just to pick up a video from the video store. It's the same problem.
So you think in just 5 years, all government communication, all bank communication is going to be digital?
Pretty well. The banks, I've looked at the payment, and the Federal Reserve has great stats in the States. Canada has similar stats on the payment system. And cash, even though, people still carry a lot of cash around, it's a tiny, tiny percentage of the payment system. Everything's, paychecks are deposited electronically. Mortgage payments are debited to your bank account electronically, your utility bills. I'm saying that there will be a small percentage within 5 or 6 or 7 years, but I think it'll get converted to parcel delivery, because there's a hugely different model there. With parcels, you only take out the parcel to the address when there's a parcel to deliver.
Yep.
The problem with the post office is there's the universal service obligation. You have it in the States, has it in Canada. You got to go to every address in the country 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year, even if you've got no mail to deliver. So I call this the emergence of the Potemkin post office, pretending to deliver mail to all of these millions and millions of addresses, but there's no mail to deliver.
But as it exists now as a government service, everyone sort of gets it equally. Now, I hear what you're arguing. Everyone gets it equally bad. But if we privatize, people in remote communities are going to get charged through the roof just to get basic parcels delivered.
The very good point, and I'm not advocating privatization. I'm just saying that their very foundation, their letters, which is the core business of the U.S. postal system and the Canadian, is literally collapsing like a stone. I mean, it's just going like a ski hill down, a very steep ski hill, and it's collapsing faster in Canada than the U.S., but it's still going down very strongly. And I did look at the Australian, I did look at the UK. You put the graphs for those 5 administrations side by side, they're all doing the same thing. It's just a very steep ski hill down. So they're going to become a smaller postal system if they reinvent themselves as a parcel post courier. The U.S. Postal Service is doing some very interesting reforms. I think the Canadian Post Office is much further behind in reforming to address and reinvent themselves as a partner of e-commerce, of Amazon, of FedEx, and so forth.
I've noticed that Amazon uses USPS to help them deliver much more than I've observed in Canada.
Yeah.
You see this happening. Are there any recommendations or course correction actions that you would give to Canada Post, to the United Postal Service, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, reform when you're declining is really, really tough. You know, in the private sector, well, you just lay everybody off and you shut down. I guess that's what Blockbuster did. I think they did go Chapter 11 in the States. But, what we're learning yet again and again is it's really tough to be, the way I like to put it, it's easy to be upwardly mobile and get promoted every year and get, big paycheck increases. It's really tough to be downwardly mobile. Nobody wants to be downwardly mobile. And that's the problem of the post office. But it's going to take tough leadership. But I think what will happen is we'll wait till the 11th hour and 59th minute, and we'll be looking at enormous, gargantuan, multi-billion-dollar deficits. And someone's going to say, wait a minute, we just can't go on doing it at this. And then we'll probably have some kind of mass layoffs. And I'm talking 5, 6, 7 years. I'm not talking in 20 or 30 years. Remember, the older people are dying off, and they're the people, to be blunt, and they're the ones who are most attached to the post office. Young people don't use the post office. I just can't make that. It's just so crystal clear.
Here I was feeling old, about turning 38 in 2 weeks, and you called me a young person earlier, so I'm happy with this interview. Ian, thanks for walking us through this. I'm sorry you didn't get your passport that day, but, we live to see another one. Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much, David. My pleasure. Thank you.
Ian Lee is an associate professor at Carleton University in the Sprott School of Business. That's our show. Thank you for tuning in. I'm off Monday. I'll see you Tuesday, and have a wonderful weekend. Mwah.